Look, big sunglasses, not emperor sunglasses, big sunglasses. Very important. Always big sunglasses, cool band.
Alright, so you know what that means. We finally get to cover fucking Darkthrone on Radio Free Innsmouth. I'm very excited. Darkthrone. If people are like, oh, what's your desert island band? I would probably say Darkthrone. I'm not going to say they're my favorite black metal band, but they have they got the largest amount of albums I would consider my favorite black metal albums. They have a stellar back catalog, and I even like the new stuff quite a bit. As I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate it. There's a lot of variety there, and they're also sort of like the meat and potatoes of black metal. So who are these Darkthrone characters? Well, originally they started out as a death metal band. They were very technically complex, a lot of like weird jazz influences. They also had a big punk influence from stuff like Crumbsuckers and Cryptic Slaughter. But later on, they completely switched over to black metal under the purview of the three major songwriters, who would be Zephyrus, Fenris, and Nocturnal Culto. But the reason Darkthrone has such a longevity to them is because they completely avoid intra-band tension by just having, okay, this is a Fenris song, this is a Nocturnal Culto song, this is a Zephyrus song. Originally it wasn't like that back in the death metal days, but once they became black metal, totally just your song on the record, his song on the record, his song on the record, just alternating back and forth. And the interesting thing is you can tell who writes which song without even looking at the credits, and I'm going to show you how to. So let's start out with the major public face of Darkthrone. That's got to be Fenris. So the thing about Fenris, his personality is that of a morning DJ.
Yes, it's Fenris.
He wants to expose people to new bands that he likes a lot. So if he's gonna write a song that's influenced by Bathory, it's gonna fucking sound like Bathory. So the way he's using chords in your right channel speaker right now is very Bathory-esque. It's not a direct ripoff, it's more like a continuation of what Bathory was doing. A continuation and extrapolation. But the Bathory influences are very obvious. This song is called To Walk the Infernal Fields. It's off of Under a Funeral Moon. So the way he works is kind of like another famous Norwegian musician, Edvard Grieg, who wrote a suite that was called From Holberg's Time. Holberg was like a Baroque era Norwegian composer, so he wrote a song that sounded like it could have been written by Holberg, even though it actually wasn't. And that's kind of the way Fenris works. So when he wants to do a Celtic Frost thing, it's going to sound like this. We covered Celtic Frost last week, so I would hope that most of you can hear the obvious Celtic Frost influence in these riffs. The fact that he's palm muting so much. And they're simple, brutal riffs. The vocals, however, that's Nocturnal Culto, not Celtic Frost influence at all. This is the second track off of Panzerfaust, which is the fifth Darkthrone album, I think. Sixth, if you include some of the other albums, you know, basically you're talking about death metal, Darkthrone, and black metal, Darkthrone put together. But anyways, second major songwriter I want to talk about is Zephyrus, who was only around for a few albums, but his influence still permeates Darkthrone today. So here is the signature Zephyrus song, Inni Deptis Skolgersfaven, which I'm sure I fucked up. So I'm going to do a little experiment here and see if you could tell where this part starts and ends, because the way he's written this guitar part and the way the drums kind of cut it up, it sort of cycles back in on itself in a very hypnotic and mysterious way. The very repetitive drum beat is kind of your only point of focus as you're left adrift in the morass of this hard to follow riff. So it's hypnotic on purpose, which would be very important for later Darkthrone. So if you couldn't tell where that riff started and ended, here is where it starts. So a very simple musical phrase repeated twice, and then it goes into this. So So you can see how it cycles back in on itself. That's why it's hard to follow. But eventually the song sort of irons itself out with a surprise thrash break that honestly isn't really that surprising because it builds so naturally out of that looping riff. And here's how that goes. So there's the end of the riff cycle. And here comes the thrash. So, very different feel than that other riff, but similar in many ways. It's also based around a very small amount of notes, and it cycles back in on itself, just kind of in an endless hypnotic loop. So this style of songwriting actually very much heavily affected Fenriz, particularly on Darkthrone's most famous album, Transylvanian Hunger. And lest we forget, do not mock Transylvanian Hunger, because
we would like to state that Transylvanian Hunger stands beyond any criticism. If any man should attempt to criticize this LP, he should be thoroughly patronized for his obviously Jewish behavior.
I'm sorry if you don't like it, that's just how it is. It says so on the inside of the booklet. Thoroughly patronized for his obvious Jewish behavior. So anyways, Fenriz was a bit bummed that Zephyrus left the band, and he started writing songs that were influenced by him, kind of blending Fenriz's old school heavy metal sensibilities and melodicism with Zephyrus's absolute misanthropy and dissonance. And then you get songs like In en hal med flesk od mjord, like this. So here's another very long and repetitive riff that's hard to follow, much like the Zephyrus one. So let's see if you can follow where this riff is going. See if you can pick out the start point and the end point. Don't worry if you can't. Transylvanian Hunger is not an easy album to get into. I will break this down for you in a second. So already you could tell that album is even more hypnotic than anything Zephyrus was doing. So here's how the first part of that riff goes. So Zephyrus riff, first part had 2 notes. This has 1 note. That's how minimalist it is. Pretty fucking serious black metal. But then the second part of the riff is a little bit more melodic, like I mentioned earlier, and it goes like this. So you can see how it cycles back into the first part of the riff, kind of in an endless atmospheric loop. And much like in that earlier Zephyrus song, this song kind of reaches a breaking point and hits a thrash riff like this. So here's the end of that cycle. And now we're into thrash metal riff. It's used to change up the song before you completely fall into a trance. Interestingly, this is also probably the only major part in the album where the drum beat changes. That's how minimalist and ambient Transylvanian Hunger was. So anyways, we've talked about Zephyrus, we've talked about Fenriz. What about Nocturnal Culto? He's sort of like the underrated Darkthrone member. Well, the thing about him is he really started to shine after Fenriz had this massive explosion of creativity in like the mid-90s. He kind of took a little bit of a break for a while and just stuck to drumming, occasionally throwing a song in there every now and then. And Nocturnal Culto took over as a lead songwriter with stuff like this. So this one is off of Total Death, the album after Panzerfaust. And you can already tell it's not really that evil. It's almost kind of pretty, which is a running theme with Nocturnal Culto, I guess because he's a kindergarten teacher in real life. So you can see this album has those modular parts I was talking about, this song rather. You can hear the songwriting is less based on moving layers around in an ambient matrix and more on riff to riff to riff connections. But also all these riffs are very multifaceted and have multiple interchangeable parts. So yes, Majestic Desolate Eye, very good song. On the album after this, Ravishing Grimness, which for some people is like, oh, that's the shitty Darkthrone album. I don't know what you guys are talking about. The album's sick. And Nocturnal Culto wrote almost all of it. Here's a song called To the Death Under the King. So this is the first part of the riff. And that's the second part, modular interchangeable parts. It's kind of like it's going up and down a staircase. Also, pretty obvious Bathory influence, I would say. But yeah, next time somebody like Razorfist tells you that Radish and Grimace is a shitty album, just kick him in the cunt for me, would you? But the cool thing about Nocturnal Culto is even during what a lot of people would consider Darkthrone's rather a dark period of the early aughts when Fenris was writing a lot of fairly uninspired songs and they were doing some really silly stuff, Nocturnal Culto still contributed some really good stuff to Darkthrone. Let's look at one song off of their 2010 album, Circle the Wagons. This one's called Running for Borders. So, some really almost kind of Motorhead riffs going on. But you can tell it's Culto writing because there's a bit of technical complexity to it. They're very multifaceted. And here we go. Very good stuff right here. So when I'm talking about riffs with interchangeable modular parts, this is like the textbook example of how Nocturnal Culto does that. Also really liking that ride cymbal from Fenris. That's how you know Fenris is a much better drummer than Lars. He actually knows like what a ride cymbal is for and how to use it. But anyways, I'm going to break down how that riff was modular for you. So the riff starts out with a headpiece like this. And then he can stick any part he wants on the end of it. So here's one variant that he can put on the end of that riff. Or he does this. Or even, perhaps, this. So then he puts all these modular parts together and we get this. So there we have it. That's how you can tell who wrote what Darkthrone song. Zephyrus, extremely minimalistic and dissonant. Often the riffs are ambient and hard to follow. Fenris, we either do a more melodic takeoff on what Zephyrus did, or else we'll do continuations of what other 80s bands might have done. And then Nocturnal Culto writes more technically complex stuff with very multi-segmented riffs. So there you go. Darkthrone. Check them out. Their new album was actually a pretty big return to form, so you might want to start there. But personally, I would go with Under a Funeral Moon or A Blaze in the Northern Sky. Transylvanian Hunger is like the best Darkthrone album, but it's also fairly inaccessible. I don't think I would start there. But anyways, I mean, most Darkthrone is pretty great. It's good for you. Puts hair on your chest. See you around.
Hey dude, fill it up, man.